Welcome to One with the Other Way, a podcast about your journey and finances. I'm your host, James, and today we're talking about financial literacy, the importance of inputs and outputs, and an understanding of why consistency is so important to a financial plan. We hope you enjoy this podcast. Welcome to One with the Other Way, a podcast about your journey and finances. I'm your host, James, and today we have our founder from Finances for a Life, Wanda Toro. She is a experienced advisor and she has a CFP designation. Wanda, do you want to say hi? Today, our topic today is financial literacy, and that's a massive topic with a lot of different ways we can go. But I think we kind of want to start with just like, what is your definition as a financial advisor? You have a lot of conversations with a lot of people, and you see probably varying levels of financial literacy. What would you define as financial literacy for anyone that is
That's
curious?
funny because we dance around the issue of financial literacy, and it is such a vague word, and then we can't quite nail it down. It is one of those things I think that you know whether or not you have or you do not have it. And I think that the key thing with it probably is your feelings around dollar signs. When you see dollar signs or when you have to work with dollar signs, I think that when you're uncomfortable with it, that's a sign of potential illiteracy in the financial arena. Again, I don't know that it can be very specific.
How do you remove fear? Because again, money equals livelihood to some people, and so if there's an insecurity, how do you help someone feel more comfortable around that topic?
So I'm thinking about breaking down the word financial and literacy, two separate topics, right? And so
Mm-hmm.
when I think about literacy, straight, the word literacy means being able to read and communicate with words and sounds, right? Literacy. And then the financial side then says, okay, being able to, there it is, communicate with numbers and finances in currency, right? In dollars. It goes back to the being able to be comfortable with communicating with dollars. Dollars is a tool to your real life, not the other way around, not controlling your life, but rather you controlling the dollars in the same way that we control our vocabulary on the literacy side. Communicating, that's easy,
Mm-hmm.
communicating verbally and communicating with the written word versus dollar signs. But arguably, you can communicate with dollar signs both orally and with your actions. But in our heads, we tend to overcomplicate the financial aspect. We think that, okay, if it's financial, that must mean S&P 500, that must mean investing, that must mean stocks, crypto. And then we start adding all of those things. But if we get down to the basics of it, what is it that finances allow us to do? It allows us to have the life that we want to have. And so, if finances allow us to have the life that we want, then we have to think about finances in terms of input into our life and then output into our life. And then, can we navigate those two? And then I think financial literacy then is that navigation between those two.
Talk about the current state of financial literacy. Everyone has different starting points in life. No one can control for that. I was very blessed myself to have one teacher in school who taught an economics course and had us track our expenditures. And it was like a 6-week thing. At the end of 6 weeks, we saw how much we spent, and he kind of went quiet on us for the rest of the semester, and then checked up with us at the end of the semester to see who was actually still keeping a budget, and I think rewarded those who did, and those who didn't, it was a learning experience that, hey, no one's keeping up with your budget but yourself. It's not like, hey, this is just a grade thing. So having that explanation to someone who does not have that experience in school, like a bank or an expenditure course or something, how do they grow in financial literacy in this age right now? Because there are a lot of people out there with a lot of advice that, and we've talked in a previous podcast about, you know, there are like, anyone's willing to give financial advice. Not everyone should be giving financial advice. And there is a system. We have FINRA broker check to determine who is a authorized person to do that. How, as an advisor, to would you speak to people and give them advice on how to learn more?
Yes, What's important about that story is two things. First is that he had you track expenditures. Second is that he had you practice consistency. Okay. So I'm going to talk to those two things. I love that the teacher did that. The teacher helped you with two things, right? The teacher helped you with a very tangible thing, which was expenditures. Remember, I was talking about finances having the input and then financials having the output. And so he focused very much here where many of us focus on the expenditures. And the other thing he taught you was about the intangibles, if you think about it. This idea of consistency. Consistency is going to be the thing that gets you to the next place. Consistency of reviewing it and looking at it again. It's hard in life, as you saw during the course of the year, all the other distractions, the homework, the dates, the things to do, the sports, all of that gets in the way of the consistency. And the consistency is an
Mm.
intangible. And it's actually, I think, the more valuable lesson that the teacher was teaching you. I'm not entirely sure it made it hit home with people because even right now you're talking about it and I see a focus on this. Well, really the focus has to be on that consistency. And I think, again, this idea of how do you get to financial literacy with the input and the output, and then the communication, right? If we go into the communication, the best way to do it is to practice. I read a book and I start with the ABCs, and then I get to that kind of elementary schools, and then I can get into the classics, and I can get into more complicated. It's the same thing with financial
Mm.
literacy. You've got to do the basics. And I'm finding these days that we get very caught up in the budget and then the income. And we've talked about like this idea of this grab for passive income. Where can I make more money? And this is true, but it's really the communication between the two that bring financial literacy home. Does that make sense?
Yeah, are you basically saying, how does my income match up with my budget?
Matching income and budget and then making changes on one side or the other is the communication. And I think that's where the financial
Mm.
literacy comes in. One of the things I think that our takeaways for today, right? Our takeaways are that there's going to
Yeah.
be, you'll always have expenses in life on the one side of your equation, on the right side, let's say. And then on the left side, you will always have income sources or sources that you can support your expenses. That communication between the income and the expenses is key to financial literacy as well as the
Hmm.
consistency, right? So the tangible is how does the income relate to the expenses? The intangible is the consistency. And I would argue that each of them are equally important in working through financial literacy. You're going to have to examine your expenses. It costs money to live, always, right? And then you're going to have to identify your key sources to support the expenditures in the long run, right? Those communication links, that's the mechanical aspect of it. That's a tangible thing to work with. The intangible is going to be the consistency. It is over a lifetime. And I think the best way to do that is sit down with a financial advisor and do a check in. Find out where you are in terms of the expenses, find out where you are in terms of income, and then figure out how it is that you want to balance the two. And do it consistently. Schedule the
Hmm.
appointment regularly and consistently. They want to talk to you about it. They want you to have success in your real life, for sure.
I think it's a great way to finish. And you can find out more information about us at financesforreallife.com. Wanda, I don't know if you have time on your schedule, but if you are always open to have someone have a consultation with you, I you can plug that here
It
if you'd
is
like.
quite painless to have a consultation with me. Believe me, I always want everyone to have their best real life. I do.
Have a wonderful week, and we'll see you in the next episode. Securities offered through LPL Financial, member FINRA, SIPC. Investment advice offered through Finances for Real Life, a registered investment advisor and separate entity from LPL Financial. The opinions voiced in this podcast are for general information only and are not intended to provide specific advice or recommendations for any individual. To determine which strategies or investments may be suitable for you, consult the appropriate qualified professional prior to making a decision.